Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Hello everybody and welcome to 3D Printing Basics. I just wanted to let you know that if you're interested in getting every single episode a week before its release and ad-free, then please head over to my Patreon. The link will be in the show notes, and like I said, you can get every single episode ad-free and a week before its initial release date. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you like this episode. Hello and welcome back to 3D Printing Basics. This is episode number 84, and in this week's episode we are going to be going over specifically the Bambu Lab AMS, but overall multi-material printing as a whole. We're going to talk about the AMS, what it does, as well as some other multi-material feeding systems, and we're going to talk about how they help you and how they can hurt you in 3D printing. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. It really means a lot to me, and with that being said, let's get right into today's episode. All right, so the main focus of today's episode is going to be the AMS, or the Bambu Labs Automatic Material System. This was among their flagship printer when they released the X1. They also released the AMS. It was one of the first things that they ever released, and its main function is that it holds up to 4 different spools of filament and automatically switches between them during prints. And you can chain up to 4 units together, so you can have up to 16 different colors or 16 different materials. They can all be daisy chained together so that on one single printer you can print with up to 16 different spools of filament. And so what this does is it obviously enables multicolor, multi-material, and autofilament backup. So what autofilament backup is that if you are printing a very long print, something that requires more than 1 kilogram of filament, you can line all 4 slots up with the exact same filament, and you can trigger a setting so that when one spool runs out, it will automatically start the next spool of filament, and so on and so forth. So that's really helpful if you're doing really long prints and for some reason, say it stops in the middle of the night and you can't get to it until the morning. Rather than doing all that, you just have 4 of the same type of filament in the AMS, and it will automatically switch between them until the print is done. I've done this myself, and it's very helpful, especially when you're mass producing parts. I've done it where the print wasn't super long, but what I did is I was printing 1,000 or so of the same part, and I just had all 4 slots having the same material, which made it for less work for me having to switch it out every single time it ran out. I just switched out all 4 at once, and that definitely saved some time for me. So the AMS overall, it's a very helpful complement to your 3D printer and enables some very important work like multi-material and multicolor 3D printing. So now that we know what the AMS is, let's talk about how it works. So the AMS is full of different sensors, different gears. It's got a whole lot of things packed into its small frame, but the main thing that it has are these spool bays. It's got 4 different spool bays, which enable you to have the 4 different rolls of filament that we talked about. They sit on these rubber rollers, and that is able to spin them forward or spin them backwards depending on whether you want to load or unload the filament. And each of these spool bays have sensors. If you're using Bambu Lab filaments, you can actually have the AMS can actually automatically detect what filament and what color you're using based off the RFID tags on the spool itself. Now, it only works with Bambu Labs filaments. It doesn't work with any other type of filament, and being someone who never really uses Bambu Labs filaments, Most of the time, what you're going to have to do is load the filament up and then go to the Bambu Handy app and set the type of filament yourself. Now, that is not at all a problem. I don't see that as a huge hassle for me, but it is something to keep in mind is that each time you load up a new color or a new type of filament, you're going to have to go in and manually change it if it's not a Bambu Labs filament. And the filament feeding system, it uses PTFE tubing to feed the filament to the extruder. So you can have however far away you want. Theoretically, you could have it 60 feet away if you wanted to, but that creates its own problems that I'm not going to get into. But it uses PTFE to feed from the AMS directly to the printer itself. And it includes, like I said, rollers to detect jams and measure feed speed as well. So not only is the AMS just a storage/use space, it also can tell how the feed rate is going as well as detecting jams. And that happens a lot to me. Well, not a lot, I don't want to say a lot, but it does happen to me on a somewhat regular basis in that the filament gets jammed and then what it will try to do is it will try to unload and reload the filament. And then if the filament is jammed, it will not be unloaded properly. And so I get a lot of errors that will say the AMS failed to load the filament, and I'll know exactly what the problem is and I'll be able to go and fix it. So that is really nice that the AMS itself is equipped with the same sort of failure detecting equipment that the printers themselves have. Just that extra level of security to prevent print fails is definitely really nice, especially for someone who's running a business and every single gram of cost, filament cost, time, all of that matters. So it's definitely something that I appreciate and why I use almost exclusively Bambu Labs 3D printers. All right, now we've talked about the perks that it has. Let's talk about the actual process. So you're going to load a spool of filament in there, and then it's going to be essentially just like loading it in there if you didn't have the Bambu Labs AMS, but it's going to be a little bit easier because instead of reaching around the back of the machine, it's going to be right on top or right on the side. Wherever you put the AMS, it's going to be right there, and you just open it up and you load it, and it automatically loads. So what it's going to do is it's going to take that filament, it's going to run it through a little bit, and then it's going to retract it back out. And that is how you know that the filament is good to go. And when you load the filament, when the filament is being loaded into the printer, it's the exact same process. You have the automatic retraction, it cuts the filament, loads the filament. You still have the same purge process. It comes out the same spot. The only difference is where the filament is itself. And the AMS is able to communicate with the printer via CAN bus so that it has that high-speed sort of communication to be able to work quickly through loading new filament and working through the old filament as well. All right, now that we know how the AMS works, let's talk about the advantages. So one of the biggest advantages for me personally is just the ease of use. I remember when I first got the Bambu Labs P1P, I think was the first printer that I got. I did not have the AMS because I didn't understand the use of it, and it was a pain trying to load any filament because it was in the back of the machine. I had to essentially turn the machine around because I couldn't reach, and then it was a pain. You had to heat the nozzle, you had to unload it, manually load it, heat the nozzle again, and then load it up, and it was just a giant pain. But with the AMS, you don't need to do any of that. You would just put the new spool in the AMS, and then you put the filament inside the, I'm not sure what you call it, the filament intake, I guess, and then you're just done. There's nothing else to it. You don't need to heat the nozzle up. You don't need to do any of that. It's really nice because you don't need to, it's not essentially loaded. You're just putting it in the AMS for when you need it, and then when the filament is needed, the AMS will send the filament to the printer to be loaded. So that's really nice, and something that I really appreciate about the AMS is that it's so easy to load and unload new filament. It's much easier than without it. It also has the reliability and the automatic backup. So the reliability of the AMS is that it has sensors the same as the printer does, so that it can detect tangles, misfeeds, issues with the speed. If the filament breaks inside the PTFE tube, it can tell you that's going on. And with the automatic backup of being able to switch to another spool when one runs out, it's just really good at preventing the printer from pausing or failing. And that's definitely a big deal, whether you're a hobbyist printer or whether you run a business. You want the printer running as much as possible without failing or without pausing, because say you go to bed at 10 p.m. and then at 10:30 p.m. the printer fails or pauses for some reason because you're having an issue with the filament. You're not going to see that until the next morning, and so your printer has been sitting for 6, 7, 8 hours with no runtime on it. And with the AMS, you possibly could have prevented that, and then you, instead of coming back to a failed printer or a paused print and you have to spend time fixing it and get it running and then you have to wait the whole day to finish it, you wake up in the morning and you come to a nice finished print. So that is definitely something that the AMS helps with, and that is why I'm definitely a big fan of it. Another nice thing about the AMS is the integration with the slicers. So it integrates fully with Bambu Studio, of course, as well as Orca Slicer. So you are actually able to go into the slicer itself and change the filament on the AMS if you want to, the same way I was talking about how you can do it with Bambu Handy on your phone. You can also do it on these two slicers. So that's definitely something that is very, very nice. So now that we know some of the advantages, let's talk about some of the drawbacks and limitations. Obviously, the biggest drawback with the AMS that you're going to get is going to be the purge waste. Every time you load a new filament in there, every time it's being used in the 3D printer, you're going to get some purge waste. It's going to be somewhere around 10 to 30 grams per filament, per color change, filament change. Anytime you're doing that, it's going to purge a little bit of the old filament so I can get the new filament in the nozzle and ready to go. That way there's no bleeding, there's no ugly spots, and every color switch or material switch is going to be perfect. But that comes with the waste, of course. You're going to have the purge as well as the purge tower, which it prints on just to make double sure that there's no bleeding or no color bleeding anywhere. But that is going to be pretty wasteful, especially if you're doing a really high color print. For example, I mentioned that you can do up to 16 colors. If you're going to be using 16 colors on a 3D print, chances are you are going to have more grams of waste filament in those purging in the purge tower than you are going to have actual grams in the finished print itself. So that is definitely something that you need to think of if you are trying to chain all these colors together or just print with multiple colors overall. Is it worth it to you to have these multiple colors for the trade-off of all the wasted filament? Now, there definitely are some options that you can do with the wasted filament. You can grind it up into new filament, but not everybody has access to that. Most people end up just throwing it away and it becomes waste. So that is definitely something to think about with the AMS. Another drawback and limitation is the limited compatibility. It's optimized for Bambu filaments. So like I said earlier, if you don't have the Bambu Labs filaments, you have to enter what kind of filament it is, what color it is. You have to do all that manually. It's not a big deal. I don't really see it as too much of a drawback, but if you're somebody who prioritizes convenience, then that is definitely not convenient. So it's definitely something to think about there. The PTFE tube length, if you are setting, for example, I have an AMS that's next to the printer instead of on top of it, and that takes a lot of PTFE tube to run it to the actual printer itself, and you can cause some backups there. There definitely are some issues that you can have there, but other than that, it's not a huge problem. You just got to make sure that your PTFE tube is the correct length and in an optimized pass so that the filament doesn't get caught up inside the PTFE tube and not even make it to the printer itself. The last kind of drawback or limitation is going to be the cost. The AMS unit, it costs $350. I believe the newer ones cost even more. The AMS2, I believe they're calling it. So that is definitely a significant cost of the printer. If you're getting a P1P or P1S, that's just about half the cost of the 3D printer itself for the AMS. Personally, I think it's worth it, but if you're getting a lot of printers, that's a lot of cost on the AMSs as well, and something that you need to factor into your budget. So that is definitely something to think about. But now that we kind of know everything there is to know about the AMS, specifically the Bambu Labs AMS, let's compare it to some other multi-material systems. I would say the most popular multi-material systems before the AMS became popular was going to be Prusa's, which was going to be the Prusa MMU, or the multi-material unit. This was a multi-material unit that runs through one single extruder, and what it does is it essentially cuts the filament right at the right spot, and then it switches over to a different feeding spot. So it kind of runs back and forth almost like a conveyor belt, and it sort of matches up the different colors. I had one of these and I never got around to building it for my Prusa because it was a lot of work and something that I didn't have time for. But I've seen people using them and I've heard really positive results with it. It just can be a little bit finicky. It's more manual setup. It's not super automated. It is open source, which is nice, but it is definitely slower as the Prusa themselves tend to be a little bit slower, and it requires some tinkering in order to get it right. Now, I remember the one that blew up in popularity pretty shortly before the Bambu Labs AMS came out was the Mosaic palette. And this was advertised as something that could print up to 8 colors at once, and it was a really cool thing. It spliced the colors together so that you could essentially have no waste, but that did come with the trade-off of you got some color bleeding here. Sometimes the color wasn't as accurate or it wasn't changing on the right layer because of the splices, but overall it was very popular. And if I remember correctly, it was pretty expensive. So I think that was why I definitely looked into it, but never pulled the trigger on it, probably because of cost. But overall, I remember the Mosaic palette was definitely a good option. And I believe it still is a good option today. So that's definitely something to look at. If you are interested in getting something other than a Bambu Labs, you obviously can't get the AMS with any other. You can't tie the AMS to any other 3D printer. So that's definitely something to consider. And with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys were able to learn mostly about the Bambu Labs AMS system, but also just multi-material printing in general and how it can help your 3D printing journey out. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment below. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate all the support. If you would like to listen to the full episode every time, ad-free and a week early, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon. I will leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.